See John, see Jesus.
My Lord.
In this text that we read this morning, Jesus had stepped out to commence the ministry that he started on this earth. And one of the first places he went that we see in this text, he went back to his hometown. You know, sometimes when you get to this place, you like to go back to your hometown. But the reception, and I'm moving quickly this morning for time is limited. The reception that he got was a cold reception. You know, usually you think when you go home, you expect to come home to a hero's welcome after you've done such great exploits. But when Jesus got up and started preaching on the Sabbath day, they looked at him and they said, is this not, we know this, isn't this Mary's boy? With what authority and what power? How, in other words, how dare he come and preach these things to us? Who does he think he is to be able to expound on the scriptures? Who does he think he is to allow himself to speak to us in that way? They were indignant, if you will, and they heard him. They were looking at this vessel, looking at this one that they thought they knew, for no doubt he had grown up among them as a young lad and gone through the ranks and come up and had gone away and come back. And they said, listen, his sisters are still here with us now. We know him. We know who he is. And the Bible said that Jesus marveled at their unbelief. And because of their unbelief, he was restricted in his ability to move in their midst. He was restricted in their ability as much as he wanted. All he could do, it said, he could do there no mighty work. See that he laid his hands on a few sick folk and healed them. That's all he could do. Why? Because he was limited in that town, limited in that place. Not because he wasn't all powerful, not because he didn't have the power to accomplish a great work, but just because of the people's attitude, the people's mentality, because they said, we know him. We're not even going to bother to listen to him. Like, how dare they heard these words of power and authority coming from his mouth. But yet they couldn't put it together. See, it was a juxtaposition. See, when you know someone, you have preconceived notions of who they are. You know, I love my hometown, but whenever, and I suffer for that one, but whenever I go back to my mother's house, you know, they always call me Nikki. And, which is fine because that's how they know me, but with that name they have associated with this, you know, little 12-year-old girl with pigtails and crooked teeth, you know, before I got braces. And so whenever they have that, call that name, it evokes that kind of notion. And I love them dearly, but there's a stigma that's attached. Right. There's a stigma that is attached. Why? Because they know me. They were around when I, you know, went my folly ways and was doing all sorts of things. They were there, so they saw me growing up. They saw me when, you know, no one else knew who I was, and I was just, you know, sitting on the back row of the choir and just, you know, had no idea what the Lord had purpose for my life.
In Connecticut, right? Amen.
In Connecticut, thank you. But they knew me. They knew me. And so, and I love the church where my mom is from. It's a church of great love, great people, really taught me fundamentals, taught me basics, taught me things that got me rooted in this truth. But they know me. And you know, whenever I go back, especially whenever my brother and I come back, they always bring back stories. But remember that time. You know, it never fails, especially with my brother, because if I was bad, he was 10 times worse. And so we always pull out the stories. Remember the time when, you know, you were hanging out the second story window at the house? And remember the time when you took your mother's car and drove off when you were 5 years old? And they have all these stories, and you know, you kind of get embarrassed when you hear these things because you're like, oh, please don't remind me. But it's because they know you. And it was the same case here. These people, they knew Jesus. So when they heard these words of power and authority coming from his mouth, they said, it was a juxtaposition. See, new word for you. Juxtaposition, when you have two things seemingly that don't belong coming together. That's right. So they say, okay, here's this Jesus that we know. And here's all this authority and great works and great things. They're saying the two of them just don't go together. They don't belong. Something is wrong. And see, the thing is, when you have a thought or an idea, or in psychology we call them schemas. When you have a schema in your mind of how something ought to be, when something new is introduced, you have one of two options. You can either reject it, or you can say, you know what? If I'm getting this new evidence, and maybe something is wrong with my stance. Maybe something's wrong with the way I see things. Maybe something is wrong with the way I think. And maybe I need to adjust myself to accommodate this new information. But see, with the people of Galilee, they didn't accommodate, they didn't adjust, but they said, listen, all they could fixate was this Jesus that they saw. All they could see was this vessel, this man whom they assumed that they knew. And so when he spoke with great authority and with wisdom, they rejected it. They said, no, we can't hear it. And because they rejected him, because they couldn't understand what he was saying, because they had preconceived notions already, they missed out on the great works that the Lord desired to do. Because they were so static in their thinking, because they were so cemented in what they thought they knew, they couldn't receive. And church, let me tell you, it's a dangerous thing to think that you know everything. Because when you think you know everything, there's nothing more for you to learn. When you think that you know it all, then that's it. If you think you know it all, then what more do you have to learn? So someone's coming to try and tell you something, impart wisdom to you, but you can't receive it. You can't receive it, not because you're not able to, but because you're not willing to. Why? Because you think you already know. You think you already know how things should be. You think this situation, sometimes I had to check myself when I was looking at this word, growing up in church, you think you know something.
Go ahead.
I don't know about you, but, after a while, they say growing on Saturday in church on Sunday, I pretty much grew up in the church or around the church. And so, for a while, I thought I knew. I thought I knew what there was to know. Someone would come and, Seventh-day Adventists would come and try and tell me, oh, no, that's not the way it is. And you just spit out verbatim. Why? Because you know this, right? You know it, so it's so ingrained in you, so you spit it out verbatim. But there's one thing to know, and there's another thing to understand and to comprehend, and to not just comprehend, but to add to the knowledge that you have. To grow, because that is how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how we increase in knowledge. But when you come to a point where you think you know, when you come to a point where you can't challenge your preconceived notions. I love my brother because whenever we get on the phone, we start to ask questions. And we look and, he's like, sometimes he knows he can talk to me because he knows I'm not going to judge. We're going to look at it together. He said, I can't tell this to anybody else because every time I say this, people are thinking I'm going out the church or I've, lost my mind or something. Why? Because he's questioning. He's questioning why? Because there's a desire to know more. And because that question, now I talk to him and he perplexes my mind sometimes with the revelations that he brings. Why? Because he desires to know. The people of this place, they thought they knew already. And because they thought they knew, there was nothing more for them to gain. Even though the Lord desired to do great things in their life, even though he desired to do great things in their midst, they got a little blessing. A couple people got healed, maybe got a little excited, but there was nothing more that the Lord could do. Why? Because the people limited themselves. Because they thought they already knew. But meanwhile, everywhere else in the land, the reputation of Jesus was spreading. And everybody had a theory about who this man was. Some said that it's John the Baptist. Some said that, he's risen from the dead and that's why all these great things are happening. And other people said, well, it's Elijah. That the word proclaimed that Elijah would come. So this is Elijah. And others said that it was a prophet, as the prophets of old. But everyone's preface or everyone's hypothesis is based on their experience and their encounter. How do I know that to be true? Why? Because the Bible tells us about Herod. See, there's a reason that this story is tucked in here. It's not just there just to take up space on a page, but it's there to show us something. You see, Herod, when he heard what Jesus did and preached, he said, you can't tell me anything. I know that this is John the Baptist. I know that this is him. I know it sounds like him. The works are the same. The words are the same. When I hear him, I get that same feeling on the inside. You see, Herod had a relationship with John. Herod had a relationship with John. Now, the relationship started off a little bit rocky because Herod came to arrest John. Why? Because Herodias, I can't even call him his wife, his brother's wife, he had taken his brother's wife. And John came and preached and said, listen, according to the Torah, this is wrong. Categorically, John didn't care that Herod was a king. See, Herod was a king and had power in the land where he was. He had authority. He was the ruler. And so there was respect and reverence that was due to Herod. But John the Baptist didn't look at Herod's exterior. He didn't look at who Herod was. He said, listen, this thing that you are doing is wrong. Categorically, undoubtedly, this is wrong. He didn't look at the exterior. He didn't look at the fact that Herod wore a big old crown on his head and sat in lofty seats and in high places. But he said, this is wrong. John happened along the way. Because Herod's intention was to capture this John and to lock him away. But somewhere along the way, this relationship changed. You see, John, even in his imprisonment, he kept preaching. He kept teaching. He kept instructing. He kept doing the same thing that he knew to do. So here's Herod. Herod has thrown him away and locked him away to get rid of him. But this imprisonment, this locking away, this taking John from his wilderness and preaching and baptizing people in the wilderness, this imprisonment became an opportunity to spread the gospel in another area. See, sometimes the Lord will bring us to a place where we think we have no business being. John didn't belong in a palace. Well, when you looked at John, he was, you get the visual, he was a scraggly man. He was wearing crackers bags, as they would say, and wearing all sorts, he wasn't well dressed. Jesus even said of him, what did you when people went out to see John the Baptist, what did you expect to see? Did you expect to see a man well-arrayed? He said, well-arrayed men belong in king's palaces. They belong tucked away up on some hill far away from the people where they can watch and judge everyone. They don't belong in the wilderness. So Herod had no place in the wilderness. Herod was not going to go out to the wilderness to see John. Herod was not going to leave the place where he was, leave his royalty to go walk on dusty streets, in the wilderness where heat is beating down on you and shining down on you, to hear this man yell at him to say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. He wasn't going to leave his place to hear some loudmouth preacher say that what you're doing is wrong. It's true. Because you think, listen, I'm king. Right? Let's think about it. Let's put ourselves in Herod's shoes for a minute. I'm king. No one is above me. This is my jurisdiction. This is my land. This is my place. And I'm going to leave the comfort of my kingdom and go out to the wilderness where I mess up how many shekel dollar shoes and get my crown all messed up. I go into the wilderness to have some man preach to me to tell me that I'm wrong, that what I'm doing is wrong. No, see, church, sometimes we've got it backwards. See, we invite people to church, and it's good. Don't get me wrong. It's good to bring people to church, but the Great Commission said, go ye into all the world. We ought to go into the world and preach the gospel. We don't sit back and expect the church to come to us. We don't sit back and expect the world to come to us and be like, yeah, come to church and hear a good word. No, we ought to take the word and we go out. Because church, let me tell you, there are some people who will never darken the door of a church. There are some people in the crack houses and on the corner who will never darken the door of a church. But you know why? Because they've seen examples of those who call themselves Christians. They've seen examples of those who call themselves Christians, and there again is a juxtaposition. See, they say they're Christ-like. They say they have the power of God living within them, but yet they behave in a manner that, you don't even want to be around them. You see them come, you say, you know what, let me go find something else to do because I don't want it. There's a juxtaposition. And because of that, they say, you know what, I want nothing to do with this church business. Because, it seems church people are just as bad as me. So if they're just as bad, why should I go? Because when people proclaim themselves to be children of the living God, but then they carry themselves in a way that's no better than anybody else, then what enticement is there to bring them in? What enticement is there to say, listen, I've got something good, something that you need, something that can help you out of your situation. If I'm in the same situation as you, I can't help you out. If I am in the same pit as you, I can't drag you out. But when they see this example, they say, listen, I want nothing to do with this church business. I'm sure we've all heard that church people are hypocrites. And it hurts my heart when I hear